Welcome to this week's edition of New York Now. I'm Dan Clark. We are now less than 2 weeks away from the state budget deadline in New York, and there is a lot on the line here. For one, we're talking about $216 billion in spending, or more, depending on how budget talks go. But every year, there's also this debate about policy in the state budget. There's a long-standing practice in Albany of using the budget as leverage for key policy items. In the last few years alone, we've seen things like criminal justice reform, gestational surrogacy, and a lot more wind up in the state budget. But this year could be different. Both the state Senate and the Assembly passed their own rebuttal spending plans to Hochul's budget this week and took out a lot of policy, saying they want to focus on the numbers. Hochul, who wants things like alcohol to go and new ethics laws in the budget, responded on Monday, saying she's standing by those priorities.
So there is precedent for policy, and I believe that it makes sense, especially we have a shortened time frame. The legislature plans on leaving early in June, and we want to get it all done. We have a lot of ideas that we believe that we can work through with the leadership, and so I feel comfortable with that.
And we did see some wiggle room on that this week from Senate Majority Leader Andrea Stewart-Cousins, who said it's not that policy has to be out of the budget, it's just that not everything's going to make it in.
We're not opposed to all policies being removed, but some are easier than others. And as I said, I'm willing to have a discussion about what can be done and what cannot be done in the budget.
So let's get more into that and other news from the week with Michael Gormley from Newsday and Joe Spector from Politico New York. Thank you both for being here.
Great to be here.
Really interesting week this week. So the one House budgets were passed. I want to go to you first, Mike. So what were your big takeaways here? For me, I am interested in what's in these budgets. I'm interested in what's in the final budget. I'm also really interested in this new dynamic between the legislature and the governor. What were your takeaways here?
Well, you're right. It's an interesting budget year this year already. What's also important is what's not in the budget, and what's not in the budget is a lot in the Senate and the Assembly budget responses is that there's not a lot of Governor Kathy Hochul's policy measures.
Right.
They're saying out. And we did a story a couple weeks ago where they were going to really make a big deal of it. Frankly, they cut out more than I expected. So they're trying to make the budget process about fiscal issues rather than about policy. And as you guys both know from your reporting, the reason the legislature would want to do that is the governor has extraordinary leverage during the budget process to include his or her policy measures.
Exactly. We're talking to Liz Krueger actually right after this segment of the show, and I asked her about this, and not to spoil it for people who are watching the show, but she says that the legislature is trying to move in a direction of let's focus on the numbers for the budget. The rest of session is about the policy side of it. Mm-hmm. But this year's an election year. Mike, can they do it all in these next, I don't know, what is it, 3 months that they have left before they leave?
Elections are a big motivator.
Yeah.
The budget is, Governor Hochul put in a lot of money in the budget. Legislature wants to put even more, so there probably is going to be agreement on that. That's big for elections, but they'll have enough time in the policy session to get at least their positions out. They can campaign on what they passed, right, if it doesn't actually become law.
So, Joe, what are you looking for in this budget? I should mention to people this is $216 billion, so we're never going to get through everything. But what are your top things that you're looking at?
I think we should go through each line item
yeah, exactly.
of the $216 billion and just break it down for viewers. No, it's, well, for one, you mentioned $216 billion. There's not an issue where there's not going to be enough money to go around. I mean, everybody always wants more, right? I mean, every special interest group, they're all at the Capitol still saying we should have more for childcare and all these other. And childcare is one that we should note because there's a real push to have sort of quote unquote universal childcare, and there's $3 billion that the Assembly included in their plan. So that's going to be one to watch as well. But what was out is also, as Mike said, is key. And one of those is mayoral control for city schools. And that's one that, and we'll talk probably a little bit more about it with the bail reform that may or may not be part of this deal as well. But, what you don't include in the budget becomes an after-budget issue for June. And when there's a lot of leverage is when you could throw things in a budget and say, listen, I had to vote for the budget. There was all this great money for education and this and that. And so you often see an issue like, well, maybe not mayoral control because that usually gets kicked off, but you'll see other issues get thrown in there to somewhat force lawmakers to vote for it. And then they can go home and say, well, why'd you vote for this? Well, because I had to vote for X, Y, and Z. So by pulling out a lot of that policy measures, you wonder if they'll get back to them in June or they'll be left undone, especially in an election year when in June they'll be focusing on the primaries and maybe don't want to address some of the thorny issues that they didn't do in the budget.
What's your sense of how a Governor Kathy Hochul changes this process versus a Governor Andrew Cuomo? They're very different styles of leadership.
Very different styles of leadership. I mean, Cuomo more or less was, this is the way we're going to do it, and it didn't bode well for his relationship with the legislature. But remember, this is Kathy Hochul's first budget, as you noted, and she's going to want to have a lot of victories. And if there's going to be pushback from the legislature, on some of those, she's going to have a fight on her hands. There's no question. Maybe with Cuomo out, it elevates the power of Andrea Stewart-Cousins and Carl Heastie in that they've been in that room before.
Yep.
You remember back, and Mike does too, when David Patterson was in office, or even when Cuomo first came in, they didn't have the experience of like a Shelley Silver or Joe Bruno or even Dean Skello. So how does that dynamic work when you have lawmakers and legislative leaders who have been there, and Kathy Hochul's the first one that you have to do it?
And I wonder if this year we see Kathy Hochul give a lot of concessions to the legislature, because I imagine the first year that she's in office, where she's in an election year, she probably doesn't want to create this tension that the legislature had with Andrew Cuomo before. But it looks like that might already be happening with bail reform, at least. Let's switch to that. Mike, so it was leaked to the New York Post on Thursday, a 10-point plan from the Hochul administration on rolling back some aspects of bail reform, maybe adding in some new criminal justice measures. We don't have to go through all of it, but what were the top lines there?
The top lines are that judges would have more discretion to consider the dangerousness to a community of releasing someone. Also, there are more charges that would be that a judge could set bail for, to basically keep people in. And also, there's one that's kind of in the weeds, but it's very important. This discovery issue.
Yes.
She would roll back a little bit of the required discovery where prosecutors would have to give all their information to the defense attorney early. She's eased up on that a bit.
That's a big problem. I mean, when that passed in 2020, I don't want to say it's a problem, but in 2020 when it passed, a problem that came along with it is the DA said, well, you give me these tighter deadlines, but you don't give me the funding to go with it. So they're working with the same staff to do a much faster pace of work, and it just wasn't working for everybody. There was some money in last year's budget for it, but I know they're still struggling. So the legislature's not happy about this, I'm assuming.
I would just caution New Yorkers. Nothing necessarily happened this week. I mean, it's good that
that's very true. That's very true.
It's good that the governor put out a position, and a lot of politicians won't. So I give her credit for that. She put out her position, but she had two other opportunities to really force this issue in her budget in January or in her 30-day amendments in February, and she didn't. Now we've got a legislature that doesn't want to deal with this for some good reasons. She's put out her position, but it doesn't mean that anything's going to happen on this.
Right, and that comes back to the point that we were making before about, is this a year where Kathy Hochul can get what she wants, or maybe she kicks the can down the road to next year? Although I have to imagine on criminal justice and crime that lawmakers have to do something that makes a headline, because that crime issue is going to be important for this year's elections.
It's a huge issue. I mean, Mike covers Long Island, in the suburbs and even in the city. You saw it in last year's election. The bail reforms was a huge issue, and many Democrats on Long Island lost because of that.
Right.
And so to go into this year without any reforms, could be problematic. But at the same time, you talk to people and they'll say, we could do anything on bail reform, and it's still going to be an issue in November. I mean, Republicans, even in a Democratic primary, Tom Suozzi, he's made that a key plank of his agenda.
Congressman Suozzi has made that an issue, a big issue in his campaign, but it goes back months. So he's able to, as he did yesterday, say that that he thinks that Governor Hochul was responding to his pressure. To some degree, it's probably true.
Yeah, I think you're right. Politics is going to be key this year, but we do have to leave it there. Mike Gormley from Newsday, Joe Spector from Politico. Thank you both so much.